Hello, and welcome to the maiden episode of Foreign and Domestic. My name is Peadar Cleary. I'm here with Ramon Mile, co-host.
Hello, folks. How's it going?
So this show, as the name suggests, Foreign and Domestic, we will be talking a lot about politics, not only here in the US, but also globally. The couple of issues we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the Filibuster Debate. We're going to get into the meat and potatoes of that, as well as the climate agenda that is being put forward by the Biden administration. So two, topics that are being talked about a lot. So we're going to really delve into that. Before we do that, I'm going to kind of talk about some quick hits for the week, essentially kind of what has been in the news, what has been percolating, people have been talking about. And so the first thing I wanted to speak on, since as you can hear, I am not from America, something that has been popping up in my news feed, is the EU's rollout of the vaccines back home. And something that had been, very, very hot agenda item, in tandem with this is obviously the Brexit and what happened there. And one of the things that I have seen is that there was always going to be an issue when it comes to, tariffs and, how the EU is going to handle that with the border in Northern Ireland. Something that nobody wants to see, whether you're, a unionist or a Republican Irishman, is a hard border because it's going to bring in problems. And the EU really did a hostile act in trying to impose checks at the border for the vaccine rollout. They have since balked on that and reneged on what they were going to do there and kind of made an exception for this, because ultimately, vaccine nationalism is not something that is going to help anybody. It's just going to prolong the pandemic. So I'm glad to see they have done that. But regardless of that, the EU needs to step up in the amount of people now they start to get vaccine. I believe, Germany, where a lot of these vaccines are being made, they only have about 2% of the population vaccinated. Mm-hmm. And you're kind of seeing the same sort of conversations happening in the US now, but okay, let's get people vaccinated. Obviously, it's been a big agenda point for Biden. So that's my quick hit is, the vaccine rollout and kind of the issues has been arising from it.
All right. And my quick hit, my first one here is going to be the $15 minimum wage. This is something that Democrats have been obviously working towards for years now, and we're finally starting to see some movement on it. We had Joe Biden earlier in the week announced that he was going to be raising the minimum wage to $15 for federal workers. So, obviously a huge step in the right direction. Not as broad reaching as every lefty would like it to be, but it is also going to be introduced by Bernie Sanders in the Senate. He announced that yesterday, and that's going to be by 2025. So I get it. Everybody's like, hey, if you, if minimum wage was connected to productivity, it should be, I think it's like $28 or something like that. So yeah, not as fast as we'd like, but our brothers and sisters in some of these Midwestern states and Southern states, that's a double up for them, folks. So I'm no incrementalist here, but that's still a huge win, and it's definitely a good opening salvo. So I will withhold some of my vitriol for it as we see how aggressive this debate gets as we roll forward here.
Yeah. And just a point on that, I saw, that one of the typical talking points you get when people, balk at minimum wage, they're like, oh, well, with that $50, what's that, like $30,000 a year? That's the same that teachers get paid. Well, the gripe is not with what a minimum wage worker will get paid. It's that teachers should get paid more.
Right, exactly.
You're attacking the wrong point there.
Yeah, I mean, and it's really frustrating to hear. And, that's an unfortunate consequence of what happens when you have a population that's been living just above destitution for so long. That's what happens. You have people who, do very valuable work in the community, teachers, paramedics, all kinds of support positions in very critical areas of social work, things like that. Yeah. People who are actually doing work that really impacts people's lives, not getting paid for it. And, it's a serious question. It's something that, America, everybody wants to do all this talk about like saving the soul of the country, all this shit. It's like, no, this is the real kind of soul searching we need to do. Mm-hmm. What are we doing when we put very low dollar signs next to work that is valuable? Who should be able to make these decisions? Should it be a national conversation where we're talking about whether people should have to live at a certain, live below a standard just because they're, flipping a burger or something like that.
Yep.
It's really, it's a very base philosophical question is, do you want people around you to be suffering? Do you want that or not? And that it's really that simple. It's it's not much more complicated than that. If we're talking about, $15 by 2025, that alleviates any concern trolling over like, oh, it's going to inflation, No, that's more than enough time for the economy to absorb the impact of that much extra money being in the economy. I'm not concerned about it. So, but yeah, what's your next quick hit?
Next quick hit, I think we both probably have something to say on this, is the madness that we've seen in the stock market this week.
Well, to the moon, guys, to the moon.
What is it called? What was when they're not the holding? They're I can't even think of the name of it.
What, shorts?
No, what they were calling themselves.
Oh, I've seen all kinds of stuff, man. This has been great meme material.
It has, and it's from a zeitgeist point of view, or just viewing it as a social experiment. It's really fun to see, forums like Reddit and Twitter where people are, coalescing around these ideas, which in essence, I mean, the same thing happens on these trading floors and in these hedge fund boardrooms and money men for years have done this. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of fun to see the so-called layperson push back a bit and kind of show the power of the people. And
absolutely.
But I mean, broadly speaking, it was great. But I guess the nitty gritty of it reveals a ton of, flaws within the current financial systems and the markets in general. And obviously, if anybody who's listening now doesn't know what's going on, long story short, GameStop, is one of those companies that, we're probably in the same bucket as a Blockbuster. We're closing. Typically, they're always attached to a mall or a strip mall. So I guess their long-term outlook was something that wasn't that healthy.
Especially with game consoles selling digital versions now. I mean, that was the real death blow that people saw coming. That's why these hedge funds shorted GameStop in the first place. Was, seeing the rollout numbers of how popular the digital new Xbox and PlayStation 5 were. Mm-hmm. Because that's everything for a brick and mortar. Are people going to come to the store to buy the game or digitally download it online? I know me personally, I've probably only bought like 2 physical copies of games in the last 3 years. Yeah. And, I purchased quite a few video games. So.
Right. And I think the catalyst to a lot of it was the guy who owned Chewy. Did you read about that?
Yeah.
He bought, was it a domineering share in the company?
I think he bought a plurality, not a majority.
Okay. So he was kind of holding what he had bought. And I guess a lot of the people from Wall Street betting on the Reddit forum saw that Melvin Capital and probably a couple others had shorted the stock, which common practice for a lot of them. But instead of them tanking because of this guy from Chewy holding and all these people, getting behind it, continued to buy and purchase. And the stock went up, I think, to as high as $485.
Yeah, I think I saw it peaked 500 at some point. And the most important thing for people to take away from this is, I'm no stock expert. I basically only knew about shorts from a few articles I've read in the actual movie, The Big Short.
Yeah.
So, I understand like the basic concepts of it, but you don't really need to be that high level of a Wall Street whiz to understand and see what's happening here. What happened here is you're seeing the first real instance of, with these apps like Robinhood and, Ameritrade, whatever, people that just want to be a day trader. What we're seeing here is a real democratization of the markets. And what I mean that is, like you said before, this is stuff that a lot of these hedge funds, these financial firms have been doing for years. Mm-hmm. They've been pummeling companies into the ground with shorts for decades now. This isn't
and been getting bailed out for it when they get in trouble.
Exactly. And now you're seeing the everyday guy being able to communicate with this new, the new advent of the internet, these boards that people post on, all these different mediums that people can collectivize and form strategy around financially. And now, look, that's really all it took was just some guys apparently reading the story. Some guys were just looking at what the most shorted companies were. Mm-hmm. And, I think GameStop was, I don't know if you'd call it over leveraged, but they were shorted 140% of how the volume of that there actually was of the stock. Mm-hmm. And, according to all these breakdowns I've heard of it, that's like, that's an immediate dead giveaway that you basically can't lose if you do try to drive this up, if you get a significant a boom of purchasing behind it. And that's exactly what these people did.
Yeah.
A guy I worked with, a guy I was working with, I think he got in on this 10 days ago. He was telling me about it. And I'm not really on Reddit like that. I know what it is and everything. He's going on and on about it. I'm watching him, across the course of the last week, just to the moon, boy. He's making all this money. And
Stonks. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, stonks. Yeah. So, I think it's a great story. I think it's, aside from, obviously all the establishment capital types where, this is dangerous. Sure, all that's true. But is it really any more dangerous than anything else that these hedge funds have been doing? And how dangerous is it really when you know that you're playing with house money? When you know that if you are that big, someone will bail you out, even if it's not the government. Other companies will come in just to secure things that they also have invested similarly with you.
Right.
They will come in and give you money.
Right.
And that's exactly what happened. I think they got an infusion on Tuesday or Wednesday
from Citadel.
Yep, they got an infusion from them.
Steve Cohen,
and it evaporated the very next day.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the issues or one of the explanations that the CEO of Robinhood tried to give was that it was just a communication issue, essentially, that they didn't communicate that the benefit of why they held the purchase of new stock was so they were protecting the actual users of what they did. But I don't buy that at all. A lot of people are speculating that it was a liquidity issue from them.
Sure.
Because ultimately, Robinhood still have a clearinghouse that they have to go through.
Right.
And that clearinghouse just happened to be Citadel.
Right.
So there's no such thing as a free lunch. I mean, it's a zero commission type of app, but they still have to go through a clearinghouse. So, I mean, I'm sure that there was some talk between them on how they can, rectify what was going on. But it was just it's been and it's not over. I think these people are still holding. I mean, there's been some drop in the stock, but it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. We could probably talk again at another time about this and see if there has been any reforms. But like I said, it's a bit of an unveiling as to, how this new era of, retail investors who are coming on, not doing your typical, mutual funds. They're looking to get in, get out. They're studying numbers. You see these guys on TikTok. They're young people, and I think it was been a bit of a perfect storm in that more people are turning to that. There's the lockdown. There's people inside. They're really studying these numbers. Where for a long time the stock market used to be this sort of thing that you only thought you could do on Wall Street, at least for the common person.
Certainly. A decade ago, absolutely. It wasn't really until...
It was convoluted.
Well, it wasn't until a lot of these apps started, making more headway. It became more popularized. I mean, what is it? One of them, it literally takes... you can put like a percentage of your paycheck directly into it, You
can round up your change from the purchase into it. I use them. I use Stash. I use Digit.
Yeah, a lot of these platforms have created a lot of interesting ways to, that's definitely something young people buy into, just trying to take some crumbs to put it into something that can maybe make some money. And, that was the part of it that was most upsetting for me is because it's like, man, these are the rules that these people who control these markets put in place. In my opinion, again, I am slightly more well-informed than the layperson on these matters, but I don't see any illegality here. How is what these gentlemen and women on Reddit, them communicating a strategy together, how is that any different than all these, Bear Stearns or any of these other huge financial corporations or hedge funds sending one of their people on CNBC and telling people, oh, here are my picks of the week. This is what the strategy could be, blah, blah, blah. How is that any different? I don't see how it is, because if it was just Bob in his basement on Reddit explaining the strategy to people, to me that's not any different. If he doesn't, it's not like anyone knows these millions of people personally on these platforms. It's just they're putting it out there. Reddit is publicly available for everyone. I don't see any issue with it.
Right. And one thing to note as well, and they may have been anecdotal stories, but I was just reading a couple of accounts of how, on why people were holding and really digging in and saying F you to these hedge funds, was a residual sentiment from 2008, 2009, where, people who were just graduating high school, their mom and dad, or people they knew, lost their job, lost a lot. And these guys, essentially tanked the whole government and economy. And that's why they're digging in. It's not even about money to them. And I'm sure there's plenty of people who are in it just get rich quick. But I think the broader unveiling, as I said, has been the discrepancies on how these things are done. Why these, shorting the market is just, it's dangerous. And, more power to anyone who got involved.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, if I was more liquid, I would have. I was watching it. Like I said, I had a guy I was working with that he was breaking it down. He's breaking it down step by step for me. This is what you do. This is what's going to happen. And it all, it happened. Yeah. I didn't, not that I didn't believe him, but, he was saying, oh, this is going to go up another 1,400%. And it did.
Yeah.
It did.
Yeah. Well, the last thing I'll say on it is what has been funny is everyone had a hot take on it, right? Mm-hmm. Including myself. As I was watching it, I was formulating like, well, this is funny. Let me talk about this. Right. But what I thought was so funny was the condescending people who, had been involved in the stock market, not necessarily involved in hedge funds, but just they've been working in the stock market for a while or doing whatever with their 401ks, and how they were like scoffing at people having an opinion on this, or millennials or younger people having an opinion on this, or retail traders. That's funny to me, but when the reality is that, like, again, this is something that has been a convoluted process for so long. More people are getting involved in it and actually pushing back against these tried and tested ways that these guys make money and really blow up a business. And you're talking about the money that is involved. I think one of those companies was at nearly like 38 billion.
Yeah, I've seen numbers all over the place. It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. And when we talk about, like, people like Bernie Sanders wants to put a tax on speculation.
Yeah.
A percent of that money is enough to, fund fucking schools, or, it's, these guys have played that game for so long and haven't got taxed accordingly. So the guardrails need to come up. There needs to be some reforms done. And that's it. That's what I'm taking from it. And hopefully that'll happen. I'll hold my breath.
Yeah.
We'll see.
And just the final thing I want to say on this is, again, back to that concept of the democratization of the market and what just happened there. And the reason I use that language is because a lot of people don't know the history of how, everyday folks, working class people, were basically convinced to buy into markets in the first place. And that was, 401ks. That was the purpose. You were tying people's retirements to the market. That was it wasn't even a manufactured consent thing. It was an openly discussed thing by many of these people who control markets and big corporations, where they were actively shopping it that way to unions and large labor groups around the country, because, their obvious goal was to eliminate pensions. And, everyone saw that was going to come along anyway, because this was back, in the, 70s and 80s, when everyone was having discussion, some people on the left and the right were both trying to privatize pensions all over the country. That hasn't let up. 401ks were viewed as sort of like the compromise position on that. And, nowadays people, whether you're in a labor union or not, people think like, oh, I'm lucky my company matches my 401k, things like that. So that's sort of how that's how the establishment sort of convinced people, or not even convinced them, but gave them literal material buy-in into the markets that they never used to be involved in the first place. And now you see people taking all of their expendable income and entering, and they don't like it.
Right.
They don't like that. And it's like, hey, this is the game you folks created with your own rules. So I love it. Play the game, boys.
Yeah. I mean, I'm into the more, like, I have a 401k, and in the previous jobs that I had, some of them matched, some of them didn't. And I was able to tuck away a nice bit of money. And me personally, I'm not really interested in day trading or doing all that. I don't have the focus to be monitoring it all the time. If I put something in and let it grow, over time, that's fine. It's a good strategy. I think it's a safe strategy.
Sure.
I think there's something to be said for, I'm sure probably a lot of people lost their, what during this, people who weren't really well informed and, made some risky plays. They're probably hurting, on the retail purchase side. But we'll see. We'll see how it shakes up.
But I mean, that's the thing. Whether it's a 401k or you're day trading, at the end of the day, it's wherever the market is when you retire. That's where you're at with your 401k. And I know that obviously it's way safer than any other real alternative, unless you have enough money to do your own Roth IRA or something of that nature. But everyone is still at the mercy of the market at the end of the day when it comes to retiring in America.
Which is
Social Security is woefully inadequate.
Yes. Well, it's another good reason or feather in the cap of people who talk about cryptocurrency, really decentralizing finance. I think, we're obviously seeing what happened with Bitcoin. I think a part of this whole thing this week is people have been buying into this dog coin.
Doge
coin.
I remember that from years ago.
I have no idea what the reason it is behind that, but again, this is another ammunition for those people that want crypto to be the currency of the future, which we'll see how that plays out. But
we'll
it certainly is carrying some weight.
Well, we could do a whole podcast on that.
Yep. All right, so that was more of a medium length hit and not a quick hit, but there was plenty to talk about with that.
Probably
one. We had to get into that.
the most joyous topic of the day.
Right. All right, so let's get into our first topic then that we're going to talk about, and I'll let you lead off on it, and that's the filibuster debate.
All right, so this is something that's been years in the making. Just to try to bring it down to politics 101 here for a minute. So the way that the Senate works is you need 60 votes. There are 100 senators. You need 60 votes to pass legislation under normal Senate rules. This has been something that's been debated back and forth depending on who's in the minority or the majority for decades now. There's been a lot of steam on the Democratic side in the last 5 years or so for elimination of the filibuster. Bernie Sanders is actually not the most radical on this. He seems like he's leaning more towards reform. But there are several prominent Democrats, like Kirsten Gillibrand years back was full-throatedly supporting the abolishment of the filibuster. And the relevant thing for today is, you had Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer recently, they had their power sharing agreement where this was actually something that McConnell was trying to get Schumer to completely take off the table any filibuster reform or abolishment. And, Schumer said no, and McConnell, he gave in. He didn't force him to put it into the Senate rules for going forward here. So that's a good sign. Now, there's two disparate issues here when you start talking about filibuster reform or abolishment. You obviously have to, those two words right there, reform or abolishment. There are some people like myself, I think that it should just be completely gotten rid of because if you ever want to reinstitute something like that, where you want to say make it 55 senators, you could just change the Senate rules. I feel like this is something that even a lot of TV personalities talk about that they don't really have that much understanding of, because the way that they talk about it, they make it seem like this is like, oh, you're changing, like it's changing the Constitution or something. It's not. No. They can literally...
Senate sets the rules for everything.
Yeah,
right?
they change their rules on the fly. And we'll get into it later, but like obviously like the nuclear option, that's something that you can literally do on just one set of issues for one thing that you're trying to get through, and it won't apply to the rest of the Senate term for, until the midterms or whatever, until there's a new Senate inducted. So yeah, abolishment would lead to just you would just purely need a majority to pass anything through the Senate. The Democrats obviously having Kamala Harris as the tiebreaker because it's a 50-50 split. So that's how that would go. I personally think that is the only way that Democrats are going to get any major legislation through in the next couple of years, other than through reconciliation. But honestly, that's your ace in the hole. That's not something you ideally want to come out of the gate with. Now, filibuster reform. I've seen some different. There's a whole school of theory on these things. Some people just want to revert it back to, old school filibustering, where you could stop a vote as long as you could talk.
Yeah.
Strom Thurmond has
24 hours.
Has the legendarily full 24-hour.
Even Ted Cruz, didn't he do one that was
like 20 hour? Yeah, he was up there.
He even said green eggs and ham. He's right out of.
He is unbearable, dude. Oh my god! But so some people want to go back to, and that's the thing, like, right? So you can still do that today in modern politics if you want. But the issue is, I've read reports where there are, there was a point in the Obama presidency where. The Senate wanted to bring things forward. This was after the supermajority was lost. The Senate Democrats wanted to bring something forward, and someone from like Ted Cruz's office would literally just like send an email to the person who oversees the Senate chamber. So not the majority leader, but who's the
Sergeant at Arms.
Yeah, the person who oversees it. Yep. And just send an email and say, I'm filibustering this. And then people would just
have to object. That's it.
Well, no. And then like the Democrats would just pull it back and not even bother introducing it. Like it got to that point. That's how obstructive this process has become in the Senate rules. So,
and that continued to, play out as what we see today, and how, there was a reaction to that by Mitch McConnell when they got into power, and so on and so forth. It's been back and forth, and it continues to drive that divide.
Yes. And just in like the recent last 6-year history of it, obviously you had Ted Cruz with his stunt. There's been a couple other people. I think Ed Markey did one for a little while too at some point in 2018. But in 2013, Harry Reid, who was the Senate Majority Leader at the time, he killed it for cabinet nominees momentarily. And McConnell did the same thing, except for Supreme Court nominees in 2018. So all that, that hoopla that we all saw about all these Supreme Court picks that Trump put through, at the end of the day, they were going through, folks. Yeah. There wasn't really any function. Now, I am of the opinion, and this is just me personally, you don't want to play games with appointees like that, because Trump proved right now, Trump proved in the last few years, you can completely legally, as the executive, just put in acting people anyway. You technically don't need anyone to be confirmed by the Senate. So I wouldn't worry about that from the Democrat side. You know what I mean? Democrats, they worry about, what if it gets used on us? I agree with that thought process when you talk about actual law, but not when it comes to procedure in the House chamber or the Senate, because there's always a workaround. There's always some way that you can try to, I don't want to call it rigging it in your favor, but flex the rules where it's not something that'll happen to you in the future. And again, Trump just showed us the cheat code. All you have to do is put in acting people in your cabinet. They don't need to be put through at all. So,
yeah, I mean, something I was thinking about as well is obviously people are talking about DC getting statehood.
Statehood, yeah.
That would potentially give 2 more Democratic senators. So it's interesting to see how that might play out in this filibuster conversation. As well as that, though, I alluded to it earlier, but the continuing rift between the two parties, I mean, it's just Washington, it feels like, has been gridlocked for quite some time, dating back to, obviously the Obama one was the most, visual and prominent that we've seen in modern times. But, it's just gone farcical now at this point. And, just the way that the Republican Party really refuses to come to the table with certain legislation, then I don't see there have been any other choice other to that reform it, because
at the very least, reform it. Yeah.
Because I think that McConnell probably reneged on battling with Schumer with regards to this, because he knows that people like Sinema and Joe Manchin, who are obviously powerful Democrats who tend to side with Republicans on certain issues because of where they're located. I'm certain that probably played into McConnell's decision to ease up on really pushing that when they were talking about power sharing.
Absolutely.
But it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I think Biden was seen as someone who could unify, but what was promising was that he had said that for something like the stimulus package, he wants to get that passed through legislation, but he knows that it needs to get passed, so everything is on the table for that. And I think Schumer echoed that as well, in that, if they want to just put their foot on the gas and get these things through, they can do that for things like reconciliation. But,
right.
But only certain parameters obviously have to be in place for it to be considered budget reconciliation. But it's a hot topic for a number of reasons, but I think something has to be done. It's going to piss off, Republicans, but at the end of the day, they can't say anything, because what have they done the last, 4 years, and how they've played that interference with this.
Right. And the thing that, that I think, again, doesn't get focused on enough is what people have to realize is the filibuster, eliminating it basically just lets you to have unlimited reconciliation. But reconciliation is limited to just budgetary things that Congress handles, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, if you wanted to do a reform around, like Obama talked about this after John Lewis died. If you want to do reform around voting rights, for example, you can change the rules in the Senate. So it's like, okay, on voting rights, pure majority. It doesn't have to be an overarching filibuster elimination.
2/3 or
right.
whatever, yeah.
So, I'm not mad at that. If, some Democrats come at it from the perspective of, they're more establishment types. Like it doesn't really get any more procedural establishment than Joe Biden in the Senate. I mean, he is the epitome of that. Him and like Chuck Grassley. How many guys have really been around that long?
Yep.
So, obviously that is where, Biden's apprehension comes from in that regard. But, this is the strategy suggestion I would put forward for Democratic Party voters, us who make up the party, even folks who aren't necessarily, I'm a Bernie guy, if you're like an Elizabeth Warren type of person, or you were, you like Kamala Harris, or even if you were a Hillary 2016 person. Here is my appeal I will make to you. If you get rid of the filibuster, like I want, you will, just like Peadar just brought up earlier, you have people, blue dog Democrats like Joe Dog Manchin. You got the Coal King over there and Kristen Sinema. If you get rid of the filibuster, you will be able to exert maximum pressure on these people. And this is something that people who are even left center, very left, can agree on. We can all get down on that. Blue dog Democrats need to be pressured to either get down or lay down in this party, especially in a time like this where we need to get shit done.
Right.
And you can't have them just floating around. Joe Manchin's he's been having a grand old time in the media.
They're saying he's the most powerful Democrat right now because of where he sits on the 50-50 Senate.
He certainly is, because the way the Senate rules are currently structured. But he's having, he's playing around with it. He's having fun talking to the media about, $2,000 checks. I didn't mean that.
Yeah.
He has a little too much leash right now. And the filibuster is probably the only mechanism you're going to get. You're going to be able to rein this guy in. Sinema doesn't seem like she's already signaled that she is somewhat open to reform. I mean, Manchin has a little bit in the past, but he certainly seems like the kind of person to me where he's more cavalier. Like he would literally go and have a conversation with Mitch McConnell. He's done it in the past where he said, "Don't worry." He said it when Obama was president. The climate shit's not passing. He said that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't have the direct quote. I'm paraphrasing. But he said things like that in the past. They've leaked to the media. McConnell does it on purpose because it reminds Democrats like, hey, I got your boy in my pocket.
And it creates
on things that matter. Don't forget, he's a Republican vote at the end of the day. And this is something that mainstream Democrats need to come to grips with. If you want to rein these people in, if you want to actually have a party apparatus that can flex some muscle and actually whip votes, you need to have procedural changes that force the issue on people like him.
Yep. And I mean, again, at the very minimum, I think reducing the threshold to maybe 52 or 53 votes. Like, let's work on that first, Democrats. But if all else fails, is it something that they, completely get rid of? I'm down for either, as long as it doesn't need to be something that the other party can use just for the sake of using it. So, we can sit here in a gridlocked government where nothing gets passed.
Well, and that's the thing, right? That's this whole, it's sort of like this, Democrats tying their hands behind their back and saying, oh, there's nothing I could do. Because that's what happens, folks. When Republicans end up having a majority in the Senate, they will nuke the rules however they want, and Democrats won't do anything about it. Yep. Okay? They do not play defensive politics in the minority well. McConnell is the Michael Jordan of it, okay? So if you change these rules right now, there is no catch-22. They're going to do it to you anyway when they're back in the majority. So all you're doing is you're freeing yourself up from not having to be held back by blue dogs in your own party, because the Republicans whip votes way better than you in the first place when they're in the majority.
Yeah.
So there is no real drawback to this. The only drawback is, how are people on TV going to talk about it? Because the people, first off, most people aren't even anywhere near neck deep enough in politics to know any of this shit we're talking about right now. That's point A. And point B, maybe you can get some buy-in on with people if you say, hey, I'm doing this so I can get you those $2,000 checks I promised.
Right.
I'm doing this. And that's what, right? So this all has to be in order too. That's why I think it's a good idea if, Bernie's saying, hey, we're going to have a stimulus package on the floor. I believe he said by Tuesday.
Yeah, Monday or Tuesday.
Yeah, Monday or Tuesday. Excellent. That is the correct order. You get that on the floor. You say, hey, this is what the American people need. This is what we're drawing up. And when Republicans block it, that's when you say, okay, we're getting rid of the filibuster.
Yeah, it's a perfect
It's the perfect. That's exactly how the political strategy needs to go in order, because you gain the buy-in from the American people, which is ultimately the only thing you need. You're in the majority. If it's popular, people want it. Republicans won't let you do it. You change the rules so you can.
And it's needed, period. And that's how Bernie is positioned it. He's like, let's bring this bill to the floor and let's, do it bipartisanly, or let's just use whatever we can to get it through. Mm-hmm. I love it. I think this is an interesting time for this debate to take place for a number of reasons. One of them obviously being the situation that we're in, just after coming off, a heated election, to say the little about that as we can. But also, obviously, there's COVID. Mm-hmm. There's the economic problems that come along with that. So something like a relief stimulus package should be something that bipartisanly people can pass, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
But then playing into that mix is how fractured the Republican Party is. And we've chatted about it, but, is there leadership within the Republican Party, maybe new leadership, who can, be vocal about working together with, a Biden administration and getting stuff passed? And if there's not, then that's when we talk about reform and the filibuster, or, blowing it up completely.
Right. And, what you're saying, that concept, it is completely possible. It's completely possible now that McConnell is the minority leader. Mm-hmm. You might see, Ted Cruz has made some odd overtures in the last couple days towards AOC, on the GameStop issue. You got, what's his name there in Utah? What's his name? Ran for president. I'm blanking on his name.
Mitt Romney?
Yeah, Romney. Yeah. He's always kept himself positioned as the rational conservative in the party. Now would be the time. This would be the time for someone like that to make some sort of a heel turn, to be like, I'm the captain now. Essentially, like, McConnell, you had your shot, brother. And
you got a lot passed for your people, I guess.
I mean, hey, they got their judges, they got their tax cuts. Biden's already signaled he's not going to touch them too much. They won. What do they really have legislatively left that they want to accomplish? It would actually probably, if I was a Republican in crafting strategy, it would be smart to have someone more moderate come in and take the forefront position on being vocal about passing coronavirus stimulus and things like that, because A, it's wildly popular. B, what is it really going to serve you right now to obstruct when, what do we got? Almost 5,000 people dying a day from coronavirus or whatever. There is no play for that politically right now. Mm-hmm. All the crazy Q people ran off with Trump into the woods, or they're, plotting executions of senators or whatever. So who are you doing this for? Right. A lot of those folks aren't going to come back to you. It's almost like they all forget, like, a lot of Trump voters were Obama voters.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't the percentages on that. I can't, pull them off from memory right now, but they were pretty high.
It was. I remember reading about that,
too. And it makes sense when you think about it, when you consider how many votes Trump got this time around. You know what I mean? Like, what did Biden have to win by, like, more than 3.8% to even win the presidency in the first place? And Trump gave him a run for his money in that regard.
Yeah.
So I think the Republican Party really, like, there is a huge opening for, there were people like that, Justin Amash, who left the party, which that might be a little too extreme, but for them. But there's definitely going to be some sort of a power vacuum here where McConnell's not going to be able to drive the issues anymore. And the Senate's the perfect place for it, because the House Republicans are just, just foaming at the mouth, rabid dogs.
They're already looking at 2022. Even the weird scenario of Kevin McCarthy going to Mar-a-Lago. Did you see that?
Yeah.
And like the picture, and how that they're not prominent Republicans. I don't think any Republicans really have been vocally, reprimanding Marjorie Taylor Greene for the wacky stuff that's coming out. Have you been seeing any of those?
Yeah, I mean,
the videos.
Oh my God.
Some of her comments on, like, the Vegas shooting, some of the stuff she's been saying about the Parkland false flag, like, just out of this world wacky. If they don't, at the very minimum, censure her, right now she's on one of the education committees. Like,
the irony of that, denying Sandy Hook, and then they put her on the education committees. Yeah, that's some really deep, that's some Orwellian shit right there.
Right. So, I mean, if they're already looking to 2022 with, someone like Kevin McCarthy, optically at least, looking like Trump is still, one of the main guys in the party, then, something like that, I mean, they need to figure it out for their own good. I mean, it's kind of funny to watch, but at the same time, if they're already eyeing 2022, which, is a fair point. If you're in the minority, you've already looking to say how we can win it back. But without being, coming forward and really, going against some of these crazy people, you're going to lose more people.
Sure.
That element of life in general, thankfully, is something that is dying down. It certainly became more vocal, I think, in the Trump era, because he emboldened a lot of that same sort of Q type of person, and that, blatantly racist or bigotry was given a voice a little bit. From the first time in 2015 when he talked about Mexican bringing the racists to, stand by, stand back, or whatever he says, stand down.
Right.
He vocalized that and gave them a bigger standing. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, that's my take on it now, is like, okay, the Republican Party have an opportunity to come to the table and play ball, or else, the Democrats can really work at reforming the filibuster or getting rid of it completely.
Right. And the last thing I wanted to mention there, squeeze in, is we also, like, when we analyze these things politically, we have to understand that for the 2022 midterms, the House is actually much more vulnerable for Democrats than the Senate is. So, I mean, that's usually the case most of the time, just because of gerrymandering and the nature of how the Senate works with red states. But there's an exceptional probability that Democrats could lose the House in 2022. So, that's why you see McCarthy at Mar-a-Lago. He's trying to set himself up to retain power. It would be a death sentence for him to not. I mean, look throughout the history of the last few speakers on the Republican side. John Boehner had to bow out to the Tea Party. Paul Ryan had to bow out. He couldn't take that pressure. So, and John Boehner also faced, Newt Gingrich was, pushing him. There's always kind of been this situation where you have these establishment guys in the Republican Party get thrust into leadership positions and having to fend off their more rabid colleagues
in the House.
And that's a very real thing. That's why you see that there's room and oxygen for people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. That's why you see who's the kid?
Matt Gaetz.
Matt Gaetz. Oh my God, that guy's geez.
Well, he was in Wyoming.
Campaigning against Cheney
already. Which is crazy.
Right. I mean, but not
because it's Matt Gaetz and it's that element.
I mean, I think it's just important for people to remember that Senate and House party politics are very different on the Republican side because there is no allegiance between the two.
The Senate are the grown-ups in the room.
Yeah, well, also McConnell has no power over those people in the House, like absolutely none.
Right.
It's the dynamic in the Democratic Party is different because even though the Republican Party is much better at top-down messaging and them all staying on cue with that, the Democratic Party is much better with punishing people, with withholding money and things like that across the Senate and the House. They're much better at that because don't forget, I think and the biggest reason for that is because McConnell is probably he's one of the biggest earners in the entire Republican Party, whether through Senate or House, and it's the inverse in the Democratic side, where Pelosi is actually one of the biggest buckrakers. So it kind of changes the dynamics of that. And I know we're getting in the weeds here, but it's something to pay attention to.
Certainly. All right, so that we give a good solid breakdown of where we're at with the filibuster, where like the two parties are postured towards it too. It's going to be something that's going to be interesting, and especially with the COVID relief bill on the stimulus bill on the table soon. I think by this time next week, the conversation will have moved forward, and it'll certainly be a hot topic then. The second thing we wanted to talk about, and this is something that climate agenda and just climate change in general, obviously was part of Obama's agenda. And globally, I think for the most part, any country and politician or leader who's worth their salt has been talking about this as, a core policy within their government. I think what's been apparent with the Biden, as he's been rolling out this climate agenda, is it's really the central part of a lot of his policies. Whether it's talking about, transportation through
Housing. Yeah.
housing, racial reform, and how climate change negatively impacts people of color and neighborhoods, low income neighborhoods. It's been something that has obviously been polarizing because Republicans denied it for a long time, but we've talked before how it's now becoming undeniable that it's impacting people, and what's really forcing Republicans' hands to pay attention to it is a lot of their voters are recognizing it and seeing it, and they just have to put their hands up and saying this is a real thing.
And even more so, corporate America. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You literally have Ford, Chevy, a lot of even oil companies where they're making overtures saying,
Right.
hey, you know what? This is a problem. We want to help. And a lot of them even stepped up during the Trump administration where
Yeah.
they were disagreeing, like, these fuel economy rules need to be higher.
Yeah.
And they did it anyway, a lot of these companies. So
Well, that's one of the things I was going to mention is that like now you're seeing prominent car makers giving an actual hard date when they're going to completely, only manufacture EV or sustainable energy cars. Now, obviously, that's easier said than done, but any one of these decisions when we talk about climate by themselves is going to be something that is tough to believe that it's going to happen, right? When people talk about, divesting from fossil fuels, that how is that sustainable? You have so many jobs tied into it, blah, 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 blah. That decision on its own, yes, I could see where somebody is coming from. But when, everything together, if there's a number of different things that are happening at once, it becomes far easier then to transition from one thing to another. That's what's given me a lot of heart with this, is that globally, obviously people are recognizing it. We see that, China, who, whether we like to admit it or not, are intrinsically connected with everything that we do, from, energy to, purchasing, to buying your shit on Amazon, whatever it would be. They're already the ones who are, getting out building factories to start putting together, lithium batteries. You have the EU making moves with that as well, putting billions and billions into, making sure that they're in a good position when it comes to completely divesting from all these different things. And then obviously America, they have, grand plans for it. I think one of the agenda items that the Biden administration talked about was getting all the federal fleets over to, American made, down to the parts, the batteries, everything. That'll be a tough ask, just because I don't think the country is set up right now, or there's no facility set up right now to be able to tick off all those boxes. But at least there's things taking place. I mean, obviously rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, which was important. I think right away optically it was important, and as a kind of nod to America's allies and people around the world, and America as a global leader should be in something like that. I mean, it really, America does have an effect on the rest of the world, and having a good position on something like climate is super important. I think John Kerry is is he the special envoy?
Is he the czar, or did he name him climate czar, or did he not make that position?
He's the White House climate envoy.
Oh, okay. All right. So he's a diplomat, or ambassador rather.
Yep.
Right. Okay.
And, they're
Not a fan of him, but okay.
No. We've seen how like there is some parallels, I guess, to the timing of Biden coming into the presidency and the issues that he has to face, as well as when FDR came in to power. There's similar types of things at play. And honestly, there's things that Biden could take from what FDR did in terms of, parks and forestry, really reclaiming public lands and using it correctly, setting up agencies, being able to get people to work on these sustainable, climate-centered infrastructure projects, transportation, get those boys and girls to working on this stuff. And I think that's what a lot of people miss in that is, okay, you will end up losing a lot of jobs, or at least, I won't say retraining these people, but there will be some shutdown of these facilities, and there will be loss ultimately. There's no way around that. But long term, there's going to be jobs that are going to be created from this, and a whole industry is created from this. And that's where I am really optimistic about it. Is, you know, we can do those two things at once. And that's the last thing I will say on it. Is one of the strengths that we have, you know, coming into this administration is, like I said, it's undeniable that it's an issue. And, you know, we cannot continue to pillage the earth of resources and really like take and take and take without there being consequences. And we're seeing that. We're seeing how far we've already gone past the, you know, people say we've already gone past the point of no return. But it will be another evolution of industry if we can make it happen. And hopefully there'll be enough people behind it doing their part. Technology will start catching up. You know, if you think about the amount of subsidies that oil and gas get in these states and around the world,
it's incredible.
It's incredible. And people talk about the profit and loss and all that would happen by shutting down these things. You could provide those same subsidies for these renewable energies, which you already kind of saw during the, you know, Obama administration. They created obviously some breaks for solar and whatnot. Yeah. Just apply that to the same concept for you know, green energy.
Right. And I mean, you know, and that's you know, that's sort of like how I break this down, right? The climate agenda of Biden, you know, and how he mixes it with this whole Buy American thing that he's trying to do. And you know, you compare it to like you know, perfect. You brought up Obama. The real issue with what first off, Obama wasn't able to get through like barely an iota of what he wanted to because of Republican obstructionism, which pairs perfectly in our filibuster conversation. So, you know, rewind that if you need to, folks. But I hope that Biden, so obviously his climate plan, you know, we tried to do our reading on it. There's some general points that he makes in there that are outside of the executive orders he put in with the idea of what he wants to be legislated. My issue with what Obama did was what little he was able to get through were things that, you know, not everyone was able to participate in and experience those subsidies. You know, for example, if you weren't a homeowner, you know, the majority of the subsidy money that he was able to get through was for solar panels on homes, businesses and things like that. And it was tax write-offs. So my issue is, you know, switch the incentives up, because obviously it wasn't something that was appealing enough to actually get because again, it's just like what you were saying with the EU process where they're putting that 3.5 billion towards battery production. The main goal is for them to wedge that door open for private investment to flood in behind it. That's exactly it. I think they're projecting 9 billion to come behind their 3.5. So I would like to see Biden do something similar. He wants to do the Civilian Climate Corps, which is great. You know, like you said, picking right up in those footsteps of FDR. It's precisely what you need is some sort of agency like that that's either going to assign or directly employ American workers into getting into these new climate solutions, these fields that will overtake coal, oil, natural gas even. That'll probably be much further down the road because Biden supports fracking. But, you know, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Might force his hand,
Yeah. But, no, I'd like to see Biden take more of a bottom-up approach. You know, I've seen there's several green economists who suggest things like, you know, either a flat $5,000 or $10,000 subsidy to every American. And the way that would work is like you could use it. It could be multifunctional. So rather than it being like a tax write-off, what you do is it's like, okay, do you own a home? Cool. Here's $5,000 for you to put solar panels on your home. Are you going to buy a car? Cool. Here's $5,000 to you, not the company, to you to go decide where you want to buy Ford's electric vehicle or Chevy's or Ram, whoever. Or if you don't own a home or a vehicle, here's $5,000 for you to have to ride green public transportation, whether that be a bus or Ubers that are electric.
Right.
Either way.
Bikes, whatever.
Exactly. Either way, that money still propels the goal that you're going for.
Right. Zero
carbon emissions. And it helps people with overall cost. And it's not something that's means tested. That's my main issue with a lot of the Democratic Party's formulation on these climate subsidy policy is that it's always something that comes after you spend. There's a lot of people who could participate and help take part in changing their lives you know, toward affecting the climate if you gave them the money ahead of time for qualified reasons. And I don't think there's any cause of concern for that because it stimulates the economy much more effectively than write-offs do because more people can partake in it. And not to mention, it stimulates the economy more effectively than, say, that top-down approach because, for example, think of how many people in major cities that don't have vehicles or own homes. They're going to use that money and they're going to spend it. And you know it's going to go in the pocket of? The person driving the Uber. You might see some competition even pop up to compete with companies like a CDTA or someone where you have people trying to create their own fleets for public transportation. Those are the kinds of things that actually are could help us exceed these goals that they're setting for 2050 net zero carbon emissions.
For 2035 to like stop and then net zero by
net zero
50.
Yeah. And so for me, I get it. That's kind of like what every country's doing right now is 2050. I don't think that's aggressive enough because it doesn't push you to do these things with the planned subsidies in the nature that could actually impact getting there faster.
Yeah. Well, hopefully if there is these things popping up with competition within industries, between like green and your more traditional, that will force the hand then of the others to follow suit. And as I said, I think any one of these things by themselves, it makes it difficult to implement it on a grand scale. But if there's multiple things happening, like, the federal fleet all turns, green, I think it's like 200 vehicles, maybe more. Then you have things like agriculture, which is a big polluter. How can that play into things? There's plenty that can be done from a tax break and incentive wise things that we could do to really move this forward. I guess it comes down to a lot of the lobbying that's done by oil and gas. But I've been even seeing like prominent oil and gas companies, BP, which they have notoriously there's been a bad BP oil spills and whatnot, but they've recognized it a while ago and now they're focusing their energies on renewables.
Yeah,
right?
I think they literally sent a letter out to their investors a little under a year ago where they said like there is going to be a shift out of this industry within the next couple decades. They're aware of it. They're I don't want to say warning, but they're alerting their investors that. And the reason they're doing this, folks, is because they're setting up the private equity to understand that there's going to be a period of slight contraction while everything is transitioning. That's how this stuff works.
You can't work around that.
Yeah, major infrastructural changes to any sector of an economy, especially when you talk about energy, is that change requires some contraction at some points. So that's why they're prefacing a lot of their policy changes that way. But honestly, it's a good thing because that. It really is such a refreshing, a breath of fresh air, rather, from
no pun intended.
Yeah, from the last 20 years of being a millennial and growing up in this country and just seeing like so many of these companies just raping the earth like completely and not giving a fuck about anything but their profits. And at the end of the day, I'm a realist. Yeah, I know that's what corporations exist for. Right. They're there to make the money, but at the
cost of
for any type of massive change like what. Not only our country, but many others are suggesting you need industry to be behind it. So that is, it's a good sign. I just hope that our leaders are going to, in the same manner that they are with, these stimulus bills, are going to be aggressive and not worry about, right now, they're putting out language, Yellen and Biden in the media where they're saying there is no risk to spending too much, only to too little on stimulus. So that's a good thing. I mean, that was the most worrying part for me during the entire, general election was like, holy shit, I hope he doesn't come out and try to be an austerity hawk. Right. I really don't, because it's like, that will be the end.
We'll get played.
This is our last opportunity for Get Back to launch back into something like, the golden age of American economics. This is the type of things that we need. People who push back against, green policy reflexively and are like, oh, gas is going to be $5 by 2021. Yeah. It's like, okay, but even if that did happen, why would it be happening? Is there any relief valve that the government's letting some pressure out from to ameliorate that? There's so many different ways that this could be attacked where if gas does go up, but, say in like 5 years, if gas is like, $7 a gallon or something, but there's those electric subsidies that I was talking about before. This stands in direct juxtaposition to what like Obama's main climate policy was, which was cap and trade, which most people agreed like was doomed to fail because again, it's top down. It forces you're twisting the arms of corporations and not letting the people have any role in it. And we've seen, most of these wide scale issues that you have, if you empower millions of Americans to actually be the change, it's much more effective.
Right. And again, if these things are in tandem, like you said, if gas goes up to $5, whatever, okay. But on the flip side, it might be that, but also you have your tax break if you take the bus, 5 times a week, or 4 times a week, whatever it is. Again, if these things are done by themselves, it'll be tough to roll them out as quickly as we'd like.
Right.
But if they're done as part of other policies, and even like with something like, for me, a big thing has been, and we won't get into the healthcare debate, but if your healthcare is tied to your job, that makes it even more of a reason that if you, let's say, quit a job to go out work for yourself or do something that is not, quote unquote, a typical 9 to 5, you're then forced to try buy healthcare. I mean, since the Obamacare, you have more options, but again, having something tied to something else ultimately forces your hand.
Sure.
With climate, it's the same. If you have options for doing the right thing, that's going to incentivize you then to work within that and do it more and more. And ultimately, hopefully, other companies and society as a whole will follow suit with that.
Right. And, and just the last thing I'll say on this is, I get it. Some people aren't as government centric as I am. People want the private sector to do more, which is as far as affecting large scale problems like climate change. They don't want the government, what they would claim overreaching and fiddling too much in the pie. But, I would make the argument that just like what you're saying is, if you have problems that exist on this scale and if you agree with the concept or the assumption that this is a life exterminating issue for the future of this world, then how do you not try to at least think outside of the box of, oh, we're just going to do the regular means tested bullshit we've always done that we know for a fact doesn't work.
Right.
And it works. No, it can be wrong. It works. It'll perform, but it will perform inadequately.
Right.
This isn't that dissimilar. This isn't really that dissimilar. Poverty, massive, huge macro issue. A lot of the things that we've done to try to alleviate that over the last 30 years, it's waxed and waned. Look where we are. All it took was one little virus. Look where we are now.
Yep.
I think like 40% of children are in poverty. So what does that teach us, people? What does that teach us? It teaches us that in order to actually you have to get at the root of these problems. You can't continually just be like, okay, well, here's the threshold for where some people will be able to participate in this world-changing thing. No, we have to think from a bottom-up approach on this.
Yeah, and that goes from everything from sustainable public housing that's built to public transport, across the board. Everything is intrinsically, connected with all of this. And you see that in how climate affects, lower income neighborhoods a lot more, down to the point where, they never planted trees in lower income neighborhoods, across America. So those areas are actually a couple of degrees warmer than other neighborhoods in that same city.
Right.
Which blows my mind. I mean, I never thought of it, but when it says to me, it makes sense. It's just changing, I guess, the habits of, an industrial country. And it's going to be tough. There's no doubt about it. But the other option is you're going to be dealing with climate refugees. You're going to be dealing with future wars about resources around climate, through fires and whatever else.
Agricultural logistic issues.
Yeah,
so
it's all related. And again, that's why I'm super happy that it is appearing to be a central focus of this administration and as a whole. I just hope that, these dates and these things that they're trying to work towards, the hard dates that companies are talking about to really divest from certain types of vehicles, it can start pulling together and we can start seeing some change with that. But yeah, I think this has been a good chat. We covered a lot. We focused obviously on the filibuster and the climate agenda, but we did hit on obviously the topics of the week. This is something that we're going to try to do as much as we can. And we certainly would love, feedback. If there's anything that you guys would like to see us talk about, we are going to have some people on to talk about different issues. So stay, look forward to that, certainly. But yeah, my name is Peadar Cleary. It was a pleasure sitting and chatting with Ramon about these things. These are things that are going to affect everyone, whether we want to admit it or not. So we just want to have a meat and potatoes conversation about them and get into the details a little bit.
All right, yeah. It's been fun, man. I enjoyed this. I think this is going to be a good thing. Thank you everybody for joining us. We'll see you next time.